Okay, the next classical civilization we're going to take a look at is the Han Dynasty of China. Let's start by taking a look at how the Han restored unity to China. Following the Qin dynasty, which was China's official first dynasty, but it's most short-lived, only about 15 years, the Han rulers established a centralized government, they lowered taxes, and they created peace and stability for about 400 years. Now, we'll take a look at the Qin dynasty a little bit later in this unit and talk about why it wasn't a long-lasting dynasty. But the Han dynasty was one of China's longest-lasting dynasties and is the dynasty that most people in China look back to as the sort of founding of what we would call Chinese civilization. The picture here is just a sort of representation of what the Emperor Liu Bang might have looked like. He would have been the founder of the Han dynasty. Okay, the emperor we actually want to spend most of our time looking at is the Emperor Wu Di, and he's pictured here in this image. And he ruled from 141 to 87 BC. Now, he expanded the Chinese Empire through war and conflict, and he forced invading nomads to retreat beyond the Great Wall. He also colonized areas to the northeast and south of China, so he expanded the size of the Chinese dynasty. Now, this empire had expanded nearly to the bounds of what we would today call present-day China. It didn't include everything in present-day China, but it came pretty close. Alright, so let's take a look at expansion. Here are some of the outposts that were added to China. The map on the right shows you essentially what the Han Dynasty looked like near the beginning of the dynasty. But eventually they added this area, which we call today Manchuria, and northern Korea was added to the dynasty as well, as was northern Vietnam in the south, and eastern Tibet in the western part of China was also added. And this part of Central Asia was also added. And you'll notice that it has sort of an odd shape. That's because it's going to follow what we know as the Silk Road. Alright, now the Han unified Chinese culture through assimilation. So they encouraged intermarriage with local peoples. So Han Chinese people were marrying other local peoples in some of these new areas that they had conquered. They also sent Chinese farmers to settle newly colonized areas. So Chinese people left central China and spread out both north, south, east, and west into these newly acquired territories. Schools also trained local people in Confucian philosophy. So Confucianism became the main philosophy during the Han Dynasty, and it would be spread with the people as they spread to other parts that surrounded China and the newly acquired territory. What's interesting about this philosophy is that it contributed to the idea of the Han Dynasty being sort of the representation of what we would call Chinese culture today. So this concept of the people of the Han. Today, if you go to modern China, like the image here shows of these young men, people in China don't call themselves Chinese. They actually, in Chinese, call themselves Han, or the people of the Han. So they trace their descendants back all the way to the Han Dynasty, whereas in the West, people call it China, because that's actually a reference to the Qin Dynasty, which was the short dynasty that preceded the Han Dynasty. But again, people in China today don't call themselves Chinese, they call themselves Han. Okay, so here's a map of the Silk Road. This is a map we're actually going to take a look at in class and spend some time on. And what you can see is that it's clearly a road, and it has places along the road where it stops. It starts over here in the east in what we call Chang'an, or today it's called Xi'an, and it goes all the way across through Central Asia past Samarkand and Bukhara, and eventually makes its way all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see that there's clearly more than one type of road, and there are different places along the road in which it could stop. What's interesting is that you notice that the road splits in two places. It splits in Donghuang, right here, and it also splits in Kashgar, over here. Now it also splits in some other places past Kashgar, but it's always interesting to look at why the road splits at both Donghuang and Kashgar. Those are interesting things that I want to make sure that you understand as we explore this. So if you're not in class and you're absent from class, and you're watching the screencast, and you will have missed out on an activity where we're going to actually address that question. Okay, so here's the question. Why does the Silk Road split at Kashgar and Donghuang? You want to be able to answer this question by the time you're done looking at some of these images. So if I take a look at this map, you can see there's Donghuang and there's Kashgar, and we want to know why the road splits in those two places. To do that, we're going to look at different maps. We're not just going to answer the question, we're going to look at a variety of maps. Now, this map that we're looking at now just shows the road, but it doesn't show any other features. So let's take a look at the next map. Alright, and this map you can see is a topographic map. It shows elevation. And if I look closely, I can see that pretty much right about here is where Donghuang is located, and right about here is Kashgar is located. So you can see that the road splits between here and here. And again, I would look at this map and I would say it probably has something to do with the topographic features. And what I see is that there's a lot of high elevation around the outer edges, but there's a low elevation spot in the middle of that area that's between the Donghuang and Kashgar cities. So that might suggest that it's a lower elevation surrounded by higher elevation. Let's take a look at the next map. This map is a precipitation map. It shows the amount of rainfall that occurs in China. And again, if I look at where Donghuang is located, which is, again, right about here, okay, and Kashgar is located right about here, I can see that that area in between is relatively red. Okay, what that means is it doesn't get a lot of precipitation. In fact, it gets very little precipitation, as opposed to, say, southern China, which is way over here in the southeast. Lots of rain in the southeastern part of China. But between Donghuang and Kashgar, there's very little rain. That would suggest that it probably has a desert climate. So I know it has a low elevation, and now I know it has a desert climate. All right. Now this map is a little bit more detailed, and again I can see that right about here is where Donghuang would be located, and right about here is where Kashgar, where it says Kashi, which is actually Kashgar, is located. And now I can see there's a big flat area in between. It has mountains that go around it, right? I have the Tian Shan Mountains, I have the Kunlun Mountains, and I can also see that in the middle it's a desert. So by looking at those other maps, I was able to guess that it's a flat area with not a lot of precipitation. But this map here clearly tells me that it's a desert. In fact, it's called the Taklamakan Desert. So Taklamakan literally means once you go in, you never come out. So this is not a good desert to go into because once you go in, you never come out. So let's take a look at the next map. And this map you'll see is a little bit more detailed as well. The road is more detailed. Now I can see over here where Donghuang is located, and I can see where Kashgar is located over here. And this actually shows me that at certain times of the year there's water there, maybe during the early spring when the sort of snows melt off. The water may not be there all year, but there's a little bit of water. Again, the Taklamakan is in between, and it's still a desert. But now what I can see very clearly is the road splits, and it goes to the north, and it also goes to the south. So it doesn't go into the mountains. In fact, the roads, as you can see, these different roads go around the mountains in both cases. So the importance of understanding what the maps show us is why the road is located where it is. It's wedged between the mountains and the desert. So you don't want to go into the desert because it's the Taklamakan. Once you go in, you don't get out. But you also don't want to go into the mountains too because they're difficult to get across. So the road is located in these two major places because that's essentially the easiest place to travel. Right along the edge of the mountain, but also right along the edge of the desert. So take a look at this. Again, you got up here on the left, you've got a map that shows the road. Over here on the right, you have a topographic map. We've got a political map here in the center. We've got a precipitation map on the bottom left. And on the right over here, we have another detailed map with the road. What's important is to answer the question about why the road splits at Donghuang and Kashgar, we actually have to look at a variety of different maps. In this case, by looking at 5 different maps, I'm able to come up with a pretty good understanding of why the road has the shape that it actually does, especially when we look at that first map and the road seems to split in 2 different places at Donghuang and Kashgar. So this is just a lesson in helping you to understand why maps are important, and that again, to answer a simple question, we often have to look at a variety of different maps.